Hello crocheters, welcome back to Oh Me Oh My Crochet. Today we're going to make a crochet lace hair bow. In this tutorial I will show you how to make the longer bow. I used Hobbie's Rainbow 84 Cotton, which is considered a one weight or superfine yarn. The best yarn to use for this project is any lightweight yarn, anywhere from 1 weight to 3 weight. The smaller bow here was made with a 1 weight acrylic yarn. Depending on your yarn, use either a 3.5mm or 4mm hook. I prefer a 4mm hook for the yarn I'm using in this tutorial, but if you have a lighter weight yarn, you may use a 3.5mm. I'll be adding the bow to a barrette, but you can also add your bow to a hair tie or other clip. You'll also need a darning needle, scissors, and hot glue is optional. Let's get started. First, we'll work our starting chain, which is worked in multiples of 5. I'm making the large bow. With a starting chain of 220, your chain will be approximately 44 inches long, and the final bow size will be approximately 12 inches long. If you'd like to make a small bow, a starting chain of 110 will be approximately 22 inches long, and the final bow size will be approximately 6 inches long. So begin with a slip knot and chain in multiples of 5 until you reach your desired length. I'll be chaining 220. I've completed my chain of 220. Next, we'll slip stitch in the 10th chain from the hook. I'm going under 2 loops, the back loop and the side loop, or back bump of my chain. Alternatively, you can crochet under the back loop only. I prefer going under both loops because it looks neater in my opinion. Then you'll chain 5. You'll skip the next 4 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4. In the 5th chain, you'll work a slip stitch. Again, I'm going under both loops. This creates that second loop. You'll repeat this across the starting chain. So chain 5, skip 4, and slip stitch into the 5th. Chain 5, skip 4, and slip stitch into the 5th. Repeat this all the way until the final chain. Now we've made it to the end of our starting chain. We have a chain 5, we'll skip 4, and slip stitch. Chain 5, and then find our final chain and slip stitch. And this is what your first row should look like. To begin row 2, chain 1 and turn your work. Next, we'll slip stitch into the 2nd and 3rd chains. So there's your chain 1, your slip stitch, and your first chain, and the following one is your 2nd chain right there. So again, I like to work under both loops. If you want to work under one, that's fine. But there's that 2nd chain. We'll slip stitch. And then our third chain will slip stitch. And you should have 2 chains remaining. And we will chain 5. We'll skip over and slip stitch into the third chain. I like to count backwards, that's easier for me. So that's the 5th, 4th, and 3rd chain. And slip stitch. Now we'll repeat that, chain 5, skip over to the third chain, that's 5th, 4th, and 3rd chain, and work a slip stitch. Chain 5, skip over to the third chain, 5th, 4th, and 3rd, and slip stitch. Continue this pattern repeat all the way to the end. Now we have 2 chain 5s left. We'll slip stitch into that third chain, chain 5, and then slip stitch into that third chain. And that ends row 2. To start row 3, chain 1 and turn. Row 3 is an exact repeat of row 2. So work a slip stitch in the second chain, and a slip stitch into the third chain. And you should have 2 chains remaining. Then chain 5, and slip stitch into the third chain. Starting your row off this way will create that tapered end. Next, chain 5, and slip stitch into the third chain. Chain 5, and slip stitch into the third chain. You will repeat this pattern all the way until you reach that final chain 5. Now we've made it to the end. We have 2 chain 5s left. So we'll chain 5, slip stitch into the third chain, chain 5, and slip stitch into that last third chain. Now we've completed row 3, and this is what your work should look like. To start row 4, chain 1 and turn. Once again, this is a complete pattern repeat, so you'll repeat the same thing you did for row 2 and 3. We'll start with that slip stitch in the second chain and a slip stitch into the third chain to create that tapered end. Then we'll chain 5 and slip stitch into the third chain, chain 5, and slip stitch into the third chain. Chain 5, and slip stitch into the third chain. Continue this until the end of the row. Now we've reached the end. We have one chain 5 left. We've chained 5 and we are going to slip stitch into the third chain. And this is what your work should look like after row 4. I will be making a total of 6 rows. If you're making a smaller bow, you might want to make this 5th row your final row. Skip ahead to row 6 for pattern instructions on how to do that. Otherwise, continue with me. To start row 5, you'll chain 1 and turn, and once again, repeat row 2, 3, and 4. We'll start with that slip stitch in the second chain and a slip stitch into the third chain to create that tapered end. Then we'll chain 5 and slip stitch into the third chain. Chain 5 and slip stitch into the third chain. Chain 5 and slip stitch into the third chain. Continue this until the end of the row. Now we've reached the end. We have one chain 5 left. Chain 5 and slip stitch into that final third chain. At this point, I am going to work one final row. In this final row, the only difference is how many chains you work between slip stitches. If you want to make your bow wider, continue making rows with 5 chains between each slip stitch. When you're ready for your final row, you will chain 4 between each slip stitch. This will match your starting chain. So chain 1 and turn your work. Slip stitch into the second chain and slip stitch into the third chain. Now chain 4. Remember, we're chaining 4 so we can match the starting chain. Skip over and slip stitch into the third chain and chain 4. Skip over to the third chain and slip stitch. Chain 4 and slip stitch into the third chain. Continue this until the end of the row. Now we've made it to the end. We have 2 chain 5s left. We'll slip stitch into that third chain, and one final time chain 4 and slip stitch into the third chain. And now you can cut your yarn. So this is what your final bow should look like, with that tapered end on that side and the tapered end on the opposite side as well. I like to spread out my bow like this just to make the holes a little bigger. You can also choose to block it if you want to. Next up, we'll form the bow. This bow is large, so I'm going to demonstrate with a smaller bow so it will all fit in the frame. First, lay your bow out with the long edge at the bottom. Find the center and mark it with a stitch marker. Lay it back out, keeping the long edge at the bottom, and fold one side over like this. And the other side to match. You want your tails to cross at the stitch marker. And what you're looking at right here is the back side of the bow. Next, take a small piece of yarn and place your bow on top of it. Tie it together to hold the bow in place. See if you like the way it looks, if you like the size of the bow, and you can make little adjustments now before tying it again to secure it. Next up, we'll make the bow center. Grab your yarn, make a slip knot, and chain 11. Beginning in the second chain from the hook, single crochet 10. And our final single crochet. So that's row 1. And we'll chain 1 and turn. And for row 2, beginning in that first stitch, we'll single crochet 10. And our 10th single crochet. I'll pull up your yarn, and this is your final bow center. You can cut your yarn and place the bow center on your bow like this. Turn it around and tie it at the back with your yarn tails. I haven't woven in my ends yet, but it might be a good idea if you don't want them getting in the way. Or if they're long enough, use them to sew the barrette in place. Now grab your barrette. I'm going to be placing this barrette at the back of the bow, placed in the center just like this. And if you want, you can put a dab of hot glue to hold it in place. Then cut a long piece of yarn and feed it through your darning needle. Now you can begin stitching it into the back of your bow like this. Leave a little tail so you can tie it off at the end. Start wrapping the thread around the barrette by sewing it into the bow, through the barrette, and back through the bow until you have secured it enough. Tie the two ends together in a knot. Then cut your yarn and weave in all of your ends. If your barrette has these two holes, you can also tack them into the bow by sewing in a few stitches if you'd like to. Otherwise, your bow is done. This concludes the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and follow us on social media. Bye!